Good afternoon. We're back with another episode of the Lord of the Rings LCG Progression Series. Today is a card review of the Dunland Trap, the first adventure pack of the Ringmaker cycle immediately after the Voice of Isengard expansion. So the Voice of Isengard introduced the concept of doomed on friendly cards as a downside in exchange for a benefit, with some synergies but nothing impressive, I'd say. Let's see what this adventure pack has for us. The hero is Celeborn. Leadership 11 threat, 3/2/2, 4 health, so he's not good enough on his stats alone, as is usual for a new hero. Sylvan Noble response: after a Sylvan ally enters play, that ally gets +1 questing, +1 attack, and +1 shields until the end of the round. Okay, so we got another synergy category going. The previous ones were Dwarves, Gondor, and Outlands. None of them were good in solo because they were all slow early. Dwarves had the caveat that Dane could not ready, which meant, and each of the dwarf heroes typically had 2 willpower maximum, which meant turn 1, the maximum you could really quest for without help was 6. And it was hard to get help turn 1 because dwarves didn't have many good 1-drops, 1-cost cards, and they also didn't have good ways to play dual sphere, to play 2-drop cards first turn. And in addition, all the dwarf stats for the allies were a bit understated in order to account for Dane's buff. So the best you could really hope for was paying 2 for an additional 2 questing power, or 1 for an additional 2 if you played the lore sphere specifically. So dwarves were weak on questing early, and therefore never really got to the status of tier 1 in solo play. They were very good in multiplayer, but not in solo. Gondor synergy was very weak on questing. Boromir's buff didn't even affect questing at all, and he only had 1 questing power. So Gondor was really about battling. Now, later they got Visionary Leadership, but Visionary Leadership was difficult to make work on turn 1. And even if you did make it turn 1, it didn't really make up for the weakness of Gondor early, which is willpower. And remember, I talked about in my analysis of heroes, willpower and threat early are dual use. They're used for both advancing the quest and for defense, because the less threat and the more willpower you have, the fewer enemies you have to take on early. And you have a greater ability to clear nasty locations out that you start with on some quests, where you begin the quest with a location a location that's active and that has a terrible effect, and the sooner you clean it out, the better. And the ability to clear such locations first turn is huge, because then you avoid the nasty effect entirely. And dwarves and Gondor were both bad at that because of weak questing turn 1. Now, Outlands, same thing. Their hero, Hirluin, starts at 1 questing power. It is impractical to assume that you could buff him up to an adequate level on turn 1. He takes a while to get going. That brings us to Celeborn. He starts with 3 questing. He doesn't have to be ready to do his effect, which is good. And he buffs allies who enter play by 1 questing. Now, the thing is, that might not be good if all the Sylvan allies were understated, but we do actually have a Sylvan ally that is very good for questing, which is this card here, Sylvan Refugee from the Druiden Forest Adventure Pack. 1 costs 2 questing. After a character leaves play, discard from play. Becomes 3 questing with Celeborn on the turn that it enters. So now we're talking about no early game weakness at all, because you have a strong turn 1 play. 1 cost for 3 questing on turn 1 will cover up any weakness that you have as a result of synergy. Synergy meaning combo cards usually have a weakness being that they are slow, because combos are slower to get rolling than single cards. And Celeborn is slightly understated for Tier 1. Tier 1 I would consider 4 questing power. But Sylvan Refugee is a strong play turn 1, and that helps compensate for that. In addition, there's another card, the next card up, Ninth Guide, which is also good on turn 1 if you play it, because it allows a hero to not exhaust a quest this round, and quests for 2 itself. You can't play it turn 1 unless you're running a dual sphere deck, and for a variety of reasons that's not super viable for elves. Number 1, you have 2 cards here, the Tree People and Sylvan Refugee, which are quite good and are from different spheres, and that's 3 spheres right there with Spirit, Lore, and Leadership. So I would say that the Sylvan strategy favors Trisphere, and that is probably done deliberately so that the turn 1 will be have slightly less options, because if you just could straight up go with 2 options turn 1, that would be pretty strong. So I think this improves the use of a card like Envoy of Pelargir, which can transfer a resource from another hero. Or actually, it doesn't transfer a resource, it just adds a resource. So you play the Envoy of Pelargir, add a resource to Celeborn, and then you can play Ninth Guide as well turn 1. Anyway, I think Celeborn's good. I think the Sylvan strategy is likely to be good. And the reason is because it doesn't have the weakness of the previous 3 synergies, which is that it's weak early, turn 1. It can easily clear out the nasty locations turn 1 with a mulligan for Sylvan Refugee. Even if you don't get it, if you're playing Celeborn and say like Eowyn and a lore hero, your questing's still pretty good. In the video for this quest, the Dunland Trap, I run Bjorn, which is a 0 questing hero, and I still didn't have trouble clearing out the location on turn 1. So I think Celeborn's good, and I'm excited to see the synergy develop. Ninth Guide, 2 cost, 1101. After Ninth Guide enters play, choose a hero. That hero does not exhaust a quest this round. It's good. I'd play it in a Sylvan deck. It's not good in a non-Sylvan deck, I don't think. It's not bad. It's just adequate in a non-Sylvan deck. But with Celeborn, it's good. I'd play it in a Sylvan deck. Swift and Silent, 1 cost. Ready a hero you control, then if your threat is 20 or less, so it's a secrecy card. And this is the first time you played a copy of Swift and Silent this round. Return this card to your hand instead of discarding it. So for as long as you're at 20 threat or below, you can ready any hero for 1 cost. Typically when I design, I like secrecy cards, but I like secrecy cards that you play on turn 1 and then have an effect for the rest of the game. Either because they're an ally or a persistent attachment. This effect is okay in a deck where you can reliably stay at 20 threat or low, but that's difficult to make work. So we'll withhold judgment until I see if that deck can be built, but as of right now, I don't think I'll play this because it wouldn't be worth it just to do it on turn 1 and then throw it away, considering it costs 1 resource every time. Yeah, I don't think it's good enough in a deck that's not going to stay at 20 or less, which I haven't seen a good one of those yet. Firefoot, 2 cost, attached to a Tactics or Rohan hero. Restricted, attached hero gets +1, attack +2, instead if attached hero is Eomer. Response, after attached hero attacks alone, exhaust Firefoot to choose a non-unique enemy engaged with you. Excess damage dealt by this attack is assigned to the chosen enemy. Very niche use. There's not going to be many times at all when you're attacking with Eomer, which is its ideal usage, alone, and you have overflow damage. I mean, you could put a spear on Eomer, but that only buffs him by 1. Unless you're attacking the staging area, and this card only works if you're attacking... Well, no, you could attack the staging area. It just says after attached hero attacks alone, you exhaust Firefoot to choose a non-unique enemy engaged with you. But it doesn't say the initial attack has to be against an enemy engaged with you. So you can attack the staging area and have the overflow go to an enemy that's engaged with you. This might be good on Eomer. With 2 spears, you'd have him at 5, 7, 9 damage. And so yeah, you would have some overflow generally. There's probably a build where this card makes sense. It'd probably be a fun build too. I don't know if it'd be strong, but it'd be a fun build. Yeah, there's probably a build where this card makes sense. It'd be a good contributing card in such a build, and it would be fun at least. I don't know if it'd be strong, but it'd be fun. Close Call. 0 cost, Doomed X. Cancel X damage just dealt to a hero. Okay, so it's a one-time use of Frodo Baggins' ability. For tactics. It's hard to say when you would put this in a deck. You use Frodo. Frodo's like maximum ideal usage was in a quest like Shadow and Flame where he tanked a Balrog every turn. This card isn't going to be good for that. This card is like an emergency one-time use. Oh no, I'm going to die, but I don't generally build decks planning for an emergency to happen. So this is like a bad luck card, and I don't have a problem with bad luck cards if... Well, I'll say I like cards that reduce the randomness in terms of what you'll draw from the deck or what you'll draw from the encounter deck. But a card that cancels damage that's already been done I don't like as much. I don't know if I said that very well. I don't think this card has enough benefit to justify its inclusion. Sometimes you're not going to want to take the threat that is required to cancel the damage. Sometimes you're not going to have any damage to cancel. That's probably going to be more common. I think most of the time this card is going to sit in your hand. However, there will be a time every now and then when this card will save you from a loss. But I don't think that's common enough to include in a deck, except as a response to a specific challenge. And I'm not sure what that specific challenge might be, but I'll keep the card in mind. So it's a niche card, I think. Blue Mountain Trader, 2 cost, 1/0/1, 2 health. Choose another player. That player gains control of Blue Mountain Trader. Then that player moves 1 resource from the resource pool of a hero he controls. Okay, well that's kind of silly. It's understated. It's a fun card. Not much more to say about that. You don't play it for the stats, and the effect is a little silly. It's a little silly. So it's a fun card. The Fall of Gil-galad, 1 cost, limit 1 per deck, attached to a hero. When attached hero is destroyed, add the Fall of Gil-galad to the victory display to reduce your threat by X, where X is the attached hero's threat cost. Okay, so I'm seeing a trend now with Close Call and the Fall of Gil-galad, which is, oh no, the worst has happened, but I have a card for that. I don't build decks thinking the worst is ever going to happen. I know it does sometimes, but I don't build decks that way. So I wouldn't play either of these cards. I build decks thinking the deck is going to work the way I design it and I'm going to defeat the challenge. And I'm looking for cards that will help me do that as efficiently as possible. This is not a deck that helps you defeat a challenge. This is a card and Close Call as well. These cards don't help you defeat a challenge, they help you survive when you're failing. And I don't like cards like that. Ithilien Lookout, 3 cost, 1/2/0, Secrecy 2. Gondor Ranger. After Ithilien Lookout enters play, look at the top card of the encounter deck. If it's an enemy, you may discard it. Okay, that's a card. So I've been running, for 2 of the very challenging quests, I ran a dual Sphere Lore deck using Rangers and Ranger Bows to deal damage to the staging area in a situation where I had time to set that up, and enemies which had very negative effects when they attacked. And in that deck, this card would be good, because that deck starts at the Secrecy threshold. In fact, I run Secrecy cards in it. This card would be amazing in that deck, and would be a major upgrade over the currently existing Gondor Ranger options, which are sort of underwhelming and are really only played because they are Rangers and not because they're particularly good cards. This is a legit card in a Secrecy deck, or a deck that runs Secrecy for a turn or two like some of mine do. And I like the effect a lot. Look at the top card of the encounter deck. If it's an enemy, you may discard it. I like that as opposed to something like Close Call, because it's proactive. It's dual use. It doesn't just have an effect when things are going poorly. It can prevent things from going poorly before they start to. Close Call only has an effect if things are already going poorly. If things aren't going poorly, it does nothing. You can play Ithilien Lookout even for its effect when things are going well, and things will go even more well. You can't play Close Call or the Fall of Gil-galad when things are going well. They do nothing. Hopefully that makes sense. I like this card. I think it's got a use in a very good deck, and that very good deck is the Ranger Bow deck designed to kill enemies in the staging area before they have a chance to engage. I tried that, and I tried a Rohan deck for attacking the staging area, and I found the lore deck, surprisingly, to my surprise, to be better at accomplishing the task than the Rohan one was. So I think I'll be running this card in a deck in the future. Ithilien Lookout, I like it. The Tree People. 0 cost, return a Sylvan ally you control to your hand to search the top 5 cards of your deck for a Sylvan ally. Put that ally into play and shuffle the other cards back into your deck. You can only play 1 copy of the Tree People each phase. Think it's good when you're running Sylvans and Lore. I'd play it. If you're running Sylvans and Lore, I'd play this card. I think it's good. It's good with like Sylvan Refugee or Ninth Guide. Ninth Guide because it's cheap. So this would become like, if you had Sylvan Refugee on the table already and you played the Tree People on it, this would become a pay 1 cost, get +1 questing, or +1 attack, and search the top 5 cards of your deck for a Sylvan ally. Now, in terms of ramp, a very good tail ramps, timely aid ramps much more effectively because they can get some very high cost cards out. This can only get like a maximum of a Haldir out right now. There aren't really any very powerful Sylvans that you could grab. But nonetheless, the cost is so cheap that I would run this in any Sylvan deck where I'm running a Lore Sphere. I like it. I like the synergy I've seen so far. I hope they continue to develop it. The past trend has been that they don't. They did eventually develop Dwarves. They did eventually develop Gondor a little bit, but not till the last adventure pack of the cycle. They never really developed Outlands, so we'll see what happens with Sylvans. But so far I like what I've seen, and I think Celeborn is good enough right now to run with Ninth Guide and Sylvan Refugee. I don't know if there are any other Sylvans that are necessarily good. They may be adequate or perform certain specific functions well, but I think the good cards are Sylvan Refugee, which I've included here to talk about, but it's actually from Druidan Forest, and Ninth Guide, which was released today. And not released today, but included in the adventure pack that I'm reviewing today. The White Council. X cost. X is the number of players in the game, so for a solo player it's 1 cost. Starting with the first player, each player chooses one option: ready a hero, add a resource, draw a card, or shuffle a card from discard into his deck. Okay. It's an underwhelming effect, but also a low cost. Neutral card. Seen a number of cards like this that are just kind of meh. You play a card, you add 1 resource, you draw 1 card. This strikes me as like a neutral version of Mirror. I don't usually run cards like that are kind of meh. I look for cards that perform a specific function, that have synergies, or just straight up powerful, and this doesn't really fit any of those categories, so I probably won't run this unless it becomes synergistic with something later. Yeah, that's about all there is to say about it. But I like this adventure pack. I like Celeborn. I'm optimistic about the Sylvans. Hopefully that synergy gets developed more in the future. So thanks for watching.